Hello, I'm your host, Mariah Tineo, and welcome to Purchase Broadcast News. This past Tuesday, April 27th, Purchase College unveiled a new plaque at the entrance of the cemetery right behind the Newberger Museum here on campus. According to archival records, it has been revealed that African Americans were enslaved on the very land Purchase sits on, and it's believed that many of them are buried at the cemetery. To honor those who were enslaved and to properly preserve history, a ceremony was held with special guest speakers and cultural rituals to properly honor those whose names remains a mystery, but also to properly acknowledge that their spirits will forever live on. The inauguration ceremony was initiated at the Humanities Building, where students gathered in the theater to hear the speeches from some members that were involved in bringing the ceremony into fruition. Special guest speakers included Purchase College President Millie Peña, David Thomas, Peggy Keene, Shaka McLaughlin, and Karen Washington. After the speeches, to kickstart the ceremony, students, faculty, and members of the committee traveled to the cemetery, where everyone was greeted by the soothing music of Provost and cellist Ernest Lamb. After a speech about why unveiling this plaque is important to our community, President Peña and a committee member of the Multicultural Center unveiled the plaque, which has scripture acknowledging those buried in the cemetery. A religious ritual shortly followed, where people entered the cemetery, gathered around in a circle, and took part in prayer. Cool water and gin were poured at the base of one of the trees in the cemetery grounds as a part of the libation ceremony. At the end of the ceremony, everyone received flowers to put intentions into and place them at the base of the tree to honor the unnamed and forgotten. Hi guys, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Okay, so who am I here with?
My name is Quincy Campbell. I'm a student at SUNY Purchase. I did some research that was focused on the people who were once enslaved on the property, and then had the opportunity to share it with the school last year. So yeah.
And I'm Lizz Elvira. I'm the assistant director of the Multicultural Center on campus, and I was one of the people who helped this ceremony happen.
Okay, well, you guys just ate my questions up. Jesus. So what made you participate in this?
Well, this was all what eventually became sort of the Slavery Freedom Project. It kind of all started, for me, on my side of it, kind of started just as a personal passion project. I just really was interested in, trying to find the names of the people who were enslaved on the property and any evidence that, that was actually something that had occurred on this property. It was sort of like a local legend at Purchase for a long time. And then I was like, oh, let's see if I can find any actual historical records on it. And then when I found some stuff, I began to come up with a official record that I could share to people. And then some amazing students and faculty decided to do things based on that research. So it was really cool to see.
Yeah. What ignited that little flame to do this in the first place?
That's a good question. I don't know. I would say that it was probably when I did see that Purchase had in the past sort of addressed some history regarding slavery and the Thomas family, who were the people who originally owned this property. And I was a little disappointed in some of the wording that was used and the sort of vagueness and sort of it wasn't quite, I felt like it, not fair, but it didn't appropriate. I didn't think it was appropriate in terms of addressing the people who were harmed in the story.
Yeah.
And so that, I originally had been involved in addressing that to the faculty. And so after that, I was just sort of curious about, oh, I wonder what is here. And so I guess that's what may have started it.
Yeah.
So for me, part of it was I've been at Purchase for 6 years, but I've only been at the Multicultural Center for a little over a year and a half. And but I didn't think that I could not engage in the conversation about the campus history. I feel like the whole point of the Multicultural Center is to have those conversations and to be engaged in that. And so that was, for me, how I initially got involved. But the more that I spoke to people like Quincy and other students and faculty and staff who are really invested in this, it became more and more important for me to see this type of thing come to fruition.
So how did the first talks about this plaque start?
I think the talks about the plaque have been going on for a long time, definitely since before me. And I think that if you talk to some of our alums, they would say that this has been going on for probably 10 plus years at this point. But I know that the former chief diversity officer was working with Lisa Keller, who's one of the professors on campus, and some students and some faculty on putting together wording for a plaque so that we could have some type of acknowledgement on campus.
Yeah. So why do you think it took so long for this to actually happen?
That's a great question. I think, and I would love to hear Quincy's answer too about that, but I think that politics get in the way sometimes of making something happen. I think that people got very hung up on the wording and making sure that the wording was right, and it went through several different rounds of talks and conversation, and it was passed back and forth to different people. And I think that the wording really tripped people up.
Well,
yeah, so I think what's really interesting, as Liz alluded to before, there's sort of like a legacy of people doing this work and doing this research, and sort of the thing that at least from my experience and talking to like faculty administration, things like that, it seems it may have been, again, the wording, yes, but also sort of like coming to terms with some of the history and facts. There was research done on this, and a lot of the things that sort of I found out in my report, not all of it was really new per se, you know what I mean? It's just that, there are things like, how do they want to address this? And, for example, would you call the property a plantation? Would you call this property a farm? Some people say, oh, it was a farm that held slaves. That's different wording than calling it a plantation. You know what I mean? And then, where you say they were enslaved that lived here, or were there enslaved that were enslaved here? Those are all things, those wordings are really important and all have different political leanings. And so when I would say that, like, behind the wording are different, like, who gets to communicate, who gets to say tell the history was really important. And so once, I think last year there was a lot of pushback against racism on campus, and there was the whole thing, as you know, with Central and Big House, you know what I mean? So there was a question about race and power on campus. And so, that was the same time in which this history was brought up. And so with that in mind, like, that kind of gave an opportunity to, like, change the conversation, or gave power to those who originally didn't have power over the conversation. They gave sort of like a voice. And so that's kind of what happened in a way.
Yeah. So I know that people like Peggy and David Thomas are a part of this. How do you guys find these people? Because these are like also like key people into bringing this into fruition.
So people are found in different ways. Peggy King Jordy was a cultural consultant who our chief diversity officer actually found because she had been doing this work at multiple places all across the country and some locally. And so we contacted her first for advice. And then it turned into like her joining the conversation, her joining the ceremony, all of that, based on us originally just going to her as a consult. And then David Thomas was found through the president's office, as far as I know. They were looking at people who had done this type of work, and David Thomas's connection to the Rye Cemetery was where he got initially connected into it.
Okay. I have a question. So, I mean, I've been asking questions. What do I mean? Do you guys think that having somebody that is POC as the president also plays a role into why this came about? Or do you guys think that it didn't matter who it was? Okay, let me reword the question. Because I feel like when I came here, there was another president, and now we have a Latina president on campus. Do you guys think that by having the president be a person of color, did that make a change into this? Because this has been going on for like 10 years. Has this made a change into bringing this into action?
Well, I'll say that there's a lot of sort of, at least from my experience, this was a really educational experience about learning sort of how some of the politics of the administration and works, you know what I mean, and just trying to in getting things done. I never really this was never really planned to be actively involved in this as much as I ended up being. But when I got to really see firsthand how some of this stuff works, and so I'll say that there are like sort of forces sort of beyond the president that sort of are involved in how purchase has its look, you know what I mean? And so yes, the president is involved, but it was sort of like, it was really interesting. My first, I guess, official day in which I really started advocating for the recognition of this history was the same day as the president's inauguration. You know what I mean? And that was the day where me and some fellow other students who are amazing student leaders and activists, we met with the head of the SUNY chancellor, and this to discuss sort of the racism on campus and things like that. Because in some ways, like, the president is a part of the systemic, like, is part of the system of the school, but she's not like the end all be all of all of this. And so I will say that having a new voice, you know what I mean, to speak to, because I've spoken to the president several times, definitely made, I never met the president before, but I'm sure made an impact, you know what I mean, having a different voice. And also, she was the one who introduced us to David Thomas. But I will also say that there were also, you know, the system hasn't changed that much from my experience, at least from what I heard from the people who've done this work before me. And so it's in the sense of, like, some of the people who've been in this system have been in this system for decades. You know what I mean? They still are. You know what I mean? So we have one figurehead that's changed, but the system hasn't changed, you know? And so I'll say that having that new voice has made a difference, but I will say that the system, at least from my experience, is still the system.
Yeah.
I would give some credit to our Chief Diversity Officer for really pushing through this whole project. It's been something that's been really important to her. But I want to make sure that credit is given to students like Quincy and faculty members who support that type of work, for making sure that that information got out there. The Slavery and Freedom Project that Quincy mentioned earlier was something that was really drawing attention to the work of the students. And the student work is what really carried this and was really the foundation of all of this whole project.
Well, I have been enlightened. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys for coming here today. This is Purchase Broadcast News, and my name is Mariah Tineo. Thank you so much for tuning in.